Right. So, ladies and gentlemen, what we left off in class was with the Pan-Indian resistance movement, and Tecumseh and Tenskwatawa. You have to look at it from the same goal, but from two different perspectives. All right. So these two gentlemen. Okay, first, right? Tecumseh, Tenskwatawa, or the Prophet, right, as I mentioned in Screencast last night. And this is the battleground. This is the debated and conflicted sphere of influence, right? You have a British presence, you have Spanish and French presence, you have certainly the American presence, and then you have this intertribal presence that's trying to be created by these gentlemen here, all right? So Indian resistance, we're talking about the Shawnees, and I know we did touch on this, is you have Tenskwatawa, or the Prophet, with the sort of social, the religious, spiritual sort of cohesiveness, and Tecumseh, with the military aspect of it. When through various battles with Americans and losses and failures like that at Tippecanoe, okay, against William Henry Harrison, and later at the Battle of the Thames, right, in which Tecumseh is actually killed, you see the frustration in natives. Okay, before Tecumseh dies at the Battle of the Thames, he does turn to the British. Okay, representative here between Isaac Brock, the British general, and of course Tecumseh. So there is, before the War of 1812, just like we've seen on the high seas in the Atlantic, real reasons for Americans to feel they need to stick up for themselves militarily in the world. There is a reason there, at least there from their perspective. Okay, warhawks like Henry Clay, like John C. Calhoun, right, directly affected by these types of things, particularly Henry Clay in Kentucky in the West, are seeing this kind of thing. Right, they're seeing this, and for large reasons, they're going to want to see some justice done. Okay, and through war if necessary. That's why we have them called warlords. All right, so let's look at a couple different things from today. That was sort of just bridge the gap, so we can go over a couple things here, and just a couple things I noticed. So the workspaces question I liked. I thought it was a good way to go about it. Hopefully you guys felt the same way. I don't think the Louisiana Purchase item was so difficult. If you read the textbook, there's a lot of different ways you could take it actually in answering it. So what I found to be issues were that, of course, some people just didn't read. Some people didn't address the question, though, something I'm expecting to see again on essays. And some people had much that was correct, but it wasn't in order. And in history, order, of course, is important, okay? And I'm not talking about if you did like a graphic organizer type, whatever else, that wouldn't necessarily have the same order, but then the composition would be different, so it'll probably be okay. Multiple choice question, most people got correct. If they got it wrong, people generally put E. I don't think anybody put anything other than E if they got it wrong, and that dealt with the rights of Englishmen. So certainly something you guys want to take a look at is the Proclamation of 1763 and the Currency Act, which honestly we didn't spend a lot of time, whoops, wait a minute, did you see that yet? In class with, but certainly things we do need to take a look at. So we left off with this slide just a moment ago, and it'll be a certain party, right, as we said, Federalists, who will refer to this war as Mr. Madison's war. That is because they feel it is his, it is a partisan war, and they are not behind him in his efforts to fight it, right? Especially against what they consider their economic ally in the British, okay? So some problems we have to look at first. U.S. being unprepared militarily and economically, and two things you obviously need to have to contend in any conflict, okay? So the United States was unprepared militarily. I think we already discussed some of the ship imbalance and Navy imbalance there, naval imbalance. Americans dislike the draft, preferred to enlist in disorganized state militias, so you still see some of the Articles of Confederation mentality coming out here within the way Americans fight a war, unfortunately. Okay, so there's sort of a lag there, some residual effects, if you will, of the Articles of Confederation. Financially unprepared, right? The Bank of the United States was allowed to expire after 20 years. Okay, that leaves us with no bank, no central financial unit to deal with certain things. So during the war, there's no central means for directing the money that's needed for the war, okay, during wartime. which we've seen was already an issue during the Revolution. You wouldn't want to repeat that, but we're going to repeat it anyway. Without the ability to create new taxes efficiently, right, during the war again, the U.S. depends on more loans, something else that was an issue during the Revolution. Inflation, right, and the general rise of prices on all things is out of control. And the bank that used to control it, at least to a degree, no longer exists. Revenue from import tariffs certainly will exist, decline, and not exist, is what I meant to say, because of, among other things, a British blockade using these guys here, right, these under ships. So it's New England that will eventually, feel the very harsh impact of that British blockade, and some individuals, right, some Federalists, in desperation, really, will view the war as, again, the partisan war, Mr. Madison's war, and focusing on this specifically, okay, will go to Hartford in Connecticut and actually discuss the idea of secession. Now, to secede means to leave the Union, to actually break away. And it is the North here, right, that is now turning this into a political sectional conflict, so much so that they want to leave. Again, it's a small group of Federalists, doesn't really pick up a lot of momentum, but it is something that is worth noting for later periods of American history when secession is a lot more emphasis put on it. Okay, Treaty of Ghent ends the war. It's basically a stalemate, the war. In other words, each side really kind of goes back to the status quo, is what they say, and there's no clear winner, in other words, but the clear loser is the Indians. All right, they don't get much out of any sort of treaty. Treaty of Ghent, modern-day Belgium, is not the, it doesn't leave much for the Indians in this, and they did do quite a bit of fighting. Actually, you think they would have some sort of representation there, but certainly in 1814, when this is created, they're still not a very tolerant society, and won't be for a while, of course. So some things we should know, just in general, the strategy of Americans is to invade Canada, seeing it as weak, seeing it as a liberation campaign, completely backfires. The British and their Indian forces, opposition of New England, which would be the staging point for any invasion of Canada, and the Canadians, who were just completely underestimated at that point. So you see a little more success in the Ohio Valley, Battle of the Thames, the death of a very important leader, an American enemy, Tecumseh. But images like this of the naval battle, USS Constitution, Old Ironsides, being an important player in this, and one of only a few American ships, but a powerful one, and sees a lot of victories. What the war in general does look like this. What you want to really focus in on here, most importantly, are the British blockades. These areas here, particularly the ones in New England, which will sort of force them into a position where they were already upset and unhappy with this war. The discontent will just be elevated even more so. So, and there's not much the Americans can do about this kind of thing. It's really going to take a toll on our economy, and the war is generally fought here. This is where the war is generally fought. Zooming in on some of those areas, right, in 1813, some of those major battles, Battle of the Thames I referenced earlier, right, happening right here. All right. So some of the images important on this, of this type of battle, this type of naval battle, being important here at Fort Oswego in 1814. Okay, and most famous low point for the war, the burning of the White House and the burning of Washington, D.C. in August of 1814. So the British do march into Washington. The British are coming again, in reference to Paul Revere saying that during the Revolution. And they want to take over the important forts of the United States. And this is the rockets right there, the bombs bursting in the air. This is the Star-Spangled Banner's birth, basically, as a flag and as an anthem. Okay, a poem written by Francis Scott Key, in that he's this lawyer who's on a British prison ship, and all through the night he is writing this poem, and when morning comes, the flag is still waving. And so the British actually have some failures here. And although it starts out kind of positive for them in Washington, D.C., Americans do see a resurgence. Okay, there's Star Spangled Banner, of course. Right, the original. Actually, this is the original that flew at Fort McHenry in Baltimore, by the way. Okay, but the biggest success, okay, was really a propaganda scheme, and the treaty was signed, guys, in 1814. This battle actually happens afterwards down in New Orleans. This is very famously Andrew Jackson who led this important battle of American pride more than anything else. It's really not considered a battle during the war because it didn't happen during the war, but nonetheless, it shows the British were still trying to get access to New Orleans down here in this region, at Mississippi and into the Louisiana Territory, hopefully, and Jackson stopping them from doing that. So Americans just are filled with pride over this event. Jackson becomes a folk hero in American history, and we'll ride that reputation into the White House in the 1820s when he himself becomes president. So, election of 1816, though, we're not Jackson yet, and James Monroe, and what's called the era of good feelings. And a lot of it has to do with the creation of the Star Spangled Banner. We have an anthem, we have a real national flag. There's a lot of unity. The Federalists have sort of died out, so the dissent that's always been there is not really there anymore. And in reality, guys, we really have one party. Okay, the Republican Party is sort of the only governing party right now. It sounds kind of strange, but that's the truth. Monroe even brings former Federalists into his cabinet. So, I mean, there's really no argument, okay? But in the same way, the Republicans have become a little more central-minded. They've kind of moved away from the states' rights mentality that they used to have. A lot of that's from the war. And Henry Clay, one of the old war hawks, is a part of this whole movement, this whole momentum. Okay, and his big idea is what's called the American system, and it has a lot of comparisons made to Hamilton's ideas, all of his financial proposals that we saw in the 1790s. Okay, establishing a bank, right? The war had shown a reliance on state banks was inefficient; it didn't work, right? Passed a protective tariff of 1816, right, to protect domestic goods. These were all Hamilton's ideas. These are all things that he had ideas for, right? Would not subsidize, that his government would not spend money, federal government, on roads and canals, third part of the American system. So this is where you have issues. The troop movements during the war showed that we needed more roadways because of the expansion west, and you can just see from this map that by these later dates, there's more Americans in these areas in the Ohio Valley, and even pushing west, even further west into Louisiana Territory, right? Just acres of land being settled. I mean, just look at what happens later in American history during these parts of American history. We're not there yet when we get there. But this is a huge blip too. I mean, look at the difference just from this area here to 1820, point we're getting to in that first Monroe administration, right? So moving west, how are we going to deal with this? The truth is that last part about roadways being built does become an issue for the administration. They feel a little bit differently. We kind of get back to a little bit of that strict constructionist mentality, in that should we be spending federal funds on building something that might only help one or two states becomes a question. And actually Madison himself will end up vetoing some of those bills that go through Congress. So Monroe treats it a little bit differently though. All right, let's get back to the court, as that's something that you guys have an assignment on, and we'll look at it a little bit tomorrow. It is still the Marshall Court, as it will be for about 30 years of American history, a crucial part of American history, in fact. And Supreme Court is supreme interpreter, okay? And you have a couple different things here, right? These are the cases we'll look at tomorrow. I really don't want to spend a lot of time on this slide right now, so we'll look at that more tomorrow. And I know you're working on it, and you're working hard on it right now. But judicial nationalism, you have economic nationalism, with this treaty, the tariff idea, with a new bank, everything's being centralized. So you have a huge surge in central power, okay, federal power. Same would be true in geography, okay? John Quincy Adams is remarked by many historians as the greatest Secretary of State we ever had, okay? Again, everything's debatable. But John Quincy Adams laid the foundation, as I'm reading right now, for continued expansion. 2 treaties with Britain established a demilitarized Canadian border and provided for the joint occupation of Oregon. So if you actually look down here, right, the Rush-Bargot Treaty, right, is the one I'm referring to about demilitarized. It's almost like North-South Korea, the DMZ, a demilitarization zone. The same thing here on the Great Lakes, right here in the Midwest of the United States. The Anglo-American Accords, right, now agreeing to joint occupation of Oregon. okay, in this area here. So Oregon was actually this big to